Lovely. So what I'll do first of all, I'm just going to do a very basic overview of Prem Aware, and then I will hand over to our speakers. So we introduced the Prem Aware School Award back in 2020, last year. Find lots of feedback and comments we get from our surveys, and those of you that's been with us today will have seen the theme that's come from our most recent After NICU report as well, to support teachers and schools to better understand prematurity. So we fully know we've all been living through the COVID pandemic. We appreciate all the challenges that that's faced on many organisations, and we all know the challenges that that has faced on schools. So we launched the scheme. We put there as a soft launch. We launched the initiative through our networks, through our channels, and through our own local contacts. However, despite that, despite a pandemic, we've just been overwhelmed with interest from that, and we're delighted that we now have 8 schools that are officially Prem Aware. There's a further 10 that are in touch with us that's been looking at the criteria and going through that process. But we really hope that that number will significantly be able to increase. And so at this point, I should give you a bit of context about the Prem Aware scheme. What we basically looked at is different criteria that we could apply to award that a school could be able to be proudly say that they are Prem Aware. And that's got 3 main parts to it, really. Initially, there's some training that we ask our schools together, which Sam will talk more about in a moment, that has been put together to help raise awareness. We ask that schools think about how they can collect information to understand the children in their services, or starting at school, that they collect information about, was the child premature, was there any ongoing medical issues that came from that, to help understand those needs. And generally also just collect feedback generally throughout a time of a child's journey at school, to understand if there is any changes or anything else that is happening on their journey that might link back to their birth that should have an impact on them. So we ask that schools think about that criteria. They can do it in creative ways. The training can be done in different ways. Their admission processes and feedback processes can be done flexibly. But we like to see is that there's thought and there's an awareness of prematurity through what those schools are doing. And as I said, we're delighted that some of those schools have now joined up, and we've got one of those with us today, which is fantastic. But now we really hope to launch and share this now right across the UK. And as we said earlier, our ambition is that every school in the UK by 2030 has signed up. Just to give you a couple of other things we've got from other schools that you can see here, from other schools that have signed up. And it's great that you can see there within those you've got there a bit a greater oversight of children joining us, so they've got a better way to understand those associated challenges. Also, that we've got there from Langley First School, the Senko, talking to us about those overwhelmed at just how many of the staff were keen to access the training, and that the pride that's given the whole school, that they have got a better awareness and understanding of children born prematurely. And I just think that's it's a fantastic message and feedback that we get. Schools are very busy places. Loads of us here today will have had children. Lots of us have children that have been born premature. To hear schools giving such positive feedback about the difference that this scheme has been making to them, we really think is fantastic. So that's what we're here to do today. The chat function is open. Feel free to ask questions throughout. What we'll do is we'll have presentations from Sam, then on to Lisa, and then Janet will talk a little to us about the school process, and then we've got a chance for any questions at the end of that. But feel free to ask questions in the chat and make any comments as we go. So I will stop sharing the screen, and there we go. And then Sam, you should be able to now share your screen if I hand over to you.
Yeah. So I don't know if you can see my slides at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are they in slideshow? Yeah. I can't see, I think, what you can see. So hopefully they're in slideshow mode. And just to say thank you to Matt and to everybody at The Smallest Things for inviting me along to this festival. It's been such a powerful and incredible morning hearing about the stories for people around maternity leave. And so we're kind of focusing a bit longer term now, and not just myself at Leicester, but my colleagues in Loughborough, Nottingham, Ulster, and actually London, who are involved in the PRISM study that I'll tell you a little bit about. We're delighted to be working in partnership with the charity to try and meet the educational needs of children born prematurely. and through this, the Prem Aware Award. So you can tell the academics in the room, I've got some slides with lots of information on, because I'm just going to present a bit about the research, but you can just listen to me. You don't need to worry about the information on the slides. I just want to tell you a bit about why I think it's so important that we raise awareness of prematurity and how we've been trying to do that. So we know from research over the last sort of 20, 30, even 40 years that babies who are born preterm, in general, on average, are at higher risk of developmental problems and disorders that might persist across the lifespan. So often these can become evident early in the early years and can persist throughout childhood and adolescence. And we also know that premature birth can affect multiple areas of a child's development. So there's not one particular outcome or one particular difficulty these children might have. It can affect many areas of their development. And we also know very clearly from the research that the earlier a baby is born, the greater the risk that a child might have difficulties later in life. So while some children born at just a few weeks early, say at 34 or 36 weeks of gestation, are at increased risk for difficulties compared with children who are born at term. The earlier a baby is born, the greater that risk. So the very preterm or extremely preterm babies are at higher risk. But in terms of schooling, we also know that there's a very sort of characteristic pattern of cognitive, that sort of learning and social emotional problems preterm children might have that can impact on their learning and attainment at school. And I thought I'd just take this opportunity to go really briefly through what these might be, as this is something that parents often ask us. So shown on this slide is a picture which I think summarises some of the main difficulties that children born preterm might have as they grow up. So we know that on average, children born preterm tend to have might have slower processing speed than children who are born at term. So this simply means they might take longer to perform mental tasks. So maybe take longer to read or comprehend instructions or to complete a task they're working on. So it means they might need additional time for activities in the classroom. We also know that on average, children born preterm might have difficulties with fine motor skills or visuospatial processing. So this means maybe having difficulties handling objects or having poor hand-eye coordination. And these kinds of things can affect many activities in school, right through from getting changed for PE to participating in sports, to writing, drawing, cutting, copying from the whiteboard. So those kinds of difficulties can have quite a significant impact in the classroom. We also know on average children born preterm are at higher risk for learning difficulties than children who are born at term. And this is something we see in all of the subjects that children study at school. And the earlier a child is born, the more likely they are to have difficulties in learning or at school. But on average, they are perhaps most likely to have difficulties, especially with mathematics. And this is something parents tell us quite often. We also know that children born preterm are at higher risk for difficulties with attention or sort of concentration than children who are born at term. So they might have trouble paying attention in class, be easily distracted, or make careless mistakes with their schoolwork. And on top, we know that there's children born preterm are more likely to have ADHD, so attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, than children who are born at term. But overall, still only a small proportion of those children who would have a diagnosis of ADHD and have particularly difficulties with attention rather than hyperactivity. But there's many more children who don't have a diagnosis, who might have some difficulties with attention that impact on their learning in the classroom. And we also know preterm children may have social and emotional difficulties. So on average, they tend to be more anxious, shy, or withdrawn than children born at term, might have difficulties with social interactions or communication, so making friendships and maintaining friendships. And they also might be less likely to ask for help in the classroom. And again, there's a small proportion of children born preterm who might have a diagnosis of autism, and those rates are higher than in children born at term. But that's still only a small proportion. And overall, there are many more children born preterm who might have difficulties with social or emotional problems than children who are term born. And perhaps one of the areas we see children often have difficulties, and this is with working memory. And working memory effectively can be thought of as a mental notepad where we can store information for a short period of time whilst thinking about something else or doing something else. So for example, keeping in mind a list of instructions whilst you carry out each step, which is a frequent occurrence in schools. And children with working memory difficulties might struggle to follow instructions, for example, or have difficulty completing tasks with multiple steps, or might appear to be sort of poorly organised or lose things easily. And together, even subtle difficulties in some of these areas might have quite a significant impact on children's learning and their performance in the classroom. But one other thing I want to draw your attention to is from research, we know that overall, or on average, preterm children don't tend to have more conduct problems than children born at term. So these children don't tend to have, more so than term-born children, difficulties with externalising behaviour problems such as being aggressive or disruptive or delinquent. So they tend not to be the children who disrupt the classroom. And for this reason, alongside these other cognitive or social and emotional difficulties they might have, this means they may be less likely to come to the teacher's attention in classroom as needing support. And so their difficulties might be missed. And so we also know that these kinds of difficulties can impact on children's learning at school. And from the research, we also know, as we see with cognitive outcomes or social emotional outcomes, there's this association between your gestational age at birth and your educational outcomes. So this is a pretty picture in pink and orange, but a graph here which basically shows that the earlier children are born, the higher the risk for special educational needs later in life. So we know around about 1 in 20 children born at term might have special educational needs in the UK, and that's around 1 in 5 children who are born very preterm. And some studies have shown that for those babies born extremely preterm, before 26 weeks of gestation, up to 2 in 3 of those children might have special educational needs. And we see the same in terms of academic attainment. So the earlier a baby is born, the more likely they are to have lower academic attainment in all of the subjects studied at school, but particularly in mathematics. And so for this reason, not just myself and my colleagues on the PRISM study, but everybody at the Smallest Things charity is really aware that teachers need to know about this information, that teachers to be able to better understand the kinds of difficulties children might have and better support them in school. And this is not just an issue for the SENCO or the Special Educational Needs Coordinator or learning support assistants or head teachers. This is an issue really for all teachers. We know because of the birth rate, there's likely to be 2 or maybe even 3 children in an average size primary class who are likely to be born preterm. And so it's really important that teachers know that these children might have these difficulties and how to support them. And it's also something parents tell us, is they really feel there should be more awareness around the needs of children born preterm at school. And this is something that the Smallest Things charity have been telling us for many years from their work with parents, and in fact in the latest report released today as well. So back in 2020, Smallest Things highlighted that 90% of parents that they surveyed felt there should be more awareness and understanding of educational needs of preterm children. And less than half of parents at that time really felt the school understood their children's learning needs. But not only that, roughly a few years before, we were aware that this is what parents were telling us, but we did a survey, national survey of, in fact, educational psychologists and teachers to say, do teachers know about prematurity? Do we need to raise awareness? And at that time, around 75% of the teachers we surveyed told us that they thought that knowing that a child was born preterm would be really beneficial for that child. But only 16% of teachers had ever received any training about premature birth. And that was usually a very little amount. So knowing a child was born preterm maybe wasn't that helpful at that time for teachers knowing what to do about it. And the thing I think that really, I guess, shocked us the most was that very few teachers knew that being born preterm could be associated with children having difficulties with attention, with social difficulties, and with difficulties with mathematics. And we know that these are the kinds of difficulties children are most likely to have. So our concern was that these children were not getting the support in the very areas they needed the most. And so that led us to develop what Matt's already alluded to, was as part of the PRISM study, which was a study of preterm infants' mathematics skills with my colleagues in Loughborough and Nottingham and Ulster, but also we developed an e-learning resource that was primarily designed at the time for use by teachers to tell them about what preterm birth is, how it affects children's learning and development, how it affects their educational outcomes and their need for support at school, and how it affects their social and emotional and their behavioural outcomes. And this was funded by a charity called Action Medical Research. And through that, we were able to develop and evaluate this resource and make it freely available on the internet at pretermbirth.info. And just to reassure you that this resource was co-designed with stakeholders. So we had a fantastic input from, as you can see here, from parents of premature children, young adults themselves who'd been born preterm, teachers, teaching assistants, head teachers, educational psychologists, who all came together to help us put together the content of the resource. And importantly, I think we had that parent voice and the voice from people with lived experience of preterm birth and young adults themselves who told us what they wanted their teachers to know. So hopefully we got it right. So all of the information in the resource is evidence-based, it's based on research, but it's also being guided by what children and young adults want their teachers to know. So as I said, it teaches or provides information about what preterm birth is, how it affects children's cognition and learning, their educational outcomes. And I think the most important thing is it provides practical strategies that teachers or other education professionals, classroom assistants, teaching assistants can use to help support preterm children who have those difficulties in school. And those practical strategies are centred around these areas that I mentioned earlier, that are most common following preterm birth. So they provide strategies that teachers can use to support children with difficulties with working memory or processing speed or attention or mathematics, for example. And then we carried out an evaluation just to reassure you a little bit that we asked teachers to use the e-learning resource, and we found that it significantly improved their knowledge of premature birth and improved their confidence in supporting children in the classroom. And we saw real and tangible impacts on teaching practice. So how teachers who'd used the resource were changing the way they teach and changing the way they support children who were born preterm. But I'm not going to go into that because I think we have the people here who've already got the Prem Aware Award and can tell us what they've done in school as a result of training. So I guess I just want to sort of leave it there. So this is where we've developed this resource, and obviously this has become part of the Prem Aware Award. So part of the Prem Aware Award, and that's already outlined, is that schools and teachers and school staff undertake training using the e-learning resource to help improve their awareness and knowledge of how to support preterm children. But as I always do, I just want to finish with a couple of important take-home messages. And that from the research, we know that children born preterm might have cognitive and social and emotional difficulties that impact on their learning and attainment at school. And that supporting children in these areas, we hope, will improve their educational outcomes and improve their learning and development. And that's what this training is designed to do. But a really important message is that prematurity really is a risk factor for difficulties later in life. Not all preterm children will go on to have special educational needs or difficulties at school. Some children born extremely preterm will have absolutely no difficulties later on. Some children born just a couple of weeks early might need some additional support. And as we all know, as every parent knows, every child is different, preterm or not. So I'll leave that there, Matt, and pass back to you. And also stop sharing my screen.
That was brilliant, Sam. Thank you so much. And lots of comments in the conversation for you saying how that resonated with their child. I felt your time for what you was describing my 6-year-old who was born at 25 weeks as well. You know, you can see that. So thank you so much. So we'll try and pick up some of the questions as we go. But if Lisa, are you there?
Well, if I mute my mic, I am. Yes. Hello.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thank you for joining us. So I'll hand over to yourself.
Thank you very much. There we go.
Yeah, it's come through. Thank you.
Excellent. Is that showing as a slideshow? I don't think it is yet. Is it?
It's not in slideshow mode. There you go. That's it. Brilliant.
Okay, thank you very much. I never thought that I would actually be here sat with you talking about my story, and not because of some strange baby premonition that I wouldn't survive, but because I never really thought that I had a story to tell particularly. And it's only as I've been getting involved in premature birth and things like that, and since I met Catriona, that I've realised that actually my story is quite significant. Normally when I speak about other people. I speak about supporting young people and engaging young people and understanding and how to do that. I don't normally talk about myself, and it's made me really nervous. So I am probably much more nervous today than I have been for any other talk that I've ever done, because I've always focused on what I do, not why I do it. And the why is actually because I want to be the person that I needed when I was growing up. Now, don't get me wrong, my parents were absolutely fantastic, really understanding, but I needed somebody that didn't have that emotional connection. I needed somebody that I could say all the things that seemed a bit strange without any judgment or without any fear of upsetting anybody or anything like that. I was born in 1982 at 27 weeks. I was weighing just 2 pounds and I was a miracle baby. And I don't say that flippantly, although I struggle with the term sometimes, because we are all miracles. Anybody that survives against all the odds, we are miracles. But it leaves kind of a sense of you're okay. Like, you've survived this birth, you've survived, and you're a miracle, so carry on and everything's great. And sometimes we can struggle with that. I think it gets in the way of some of the follow-ups as well, of being seen and being looked after. I was in NICU for the majority of my first 3 months, and just before Christmas I was allowed to go home. During that time, I struggled with respiratory issues. I had problems with my bone marrow not functioning properly. I was treated with phototherapy for jaundice, as so many preemie babies are. And on one occasion, having been moved to a cot, I was found having had an apnea attack, and no one was really sure about how long I'd been there. So then I was returned to the incubator with an apnea mat and cared for in that way. But despite all of those things, I was considered this miracle baby. I was considered one of the lucky ones, and I absolutely was. And my parents were handed this exceptionally tiny baby. Sorry, I've been forgetting to go through the slides as I've been talking. My parents were handed this exceptionally tiny baby and told to just treat me as they would any normal child. And why wouldn't you? Because you're taking your baby home for the first time. I was admitted to hospital once after that, and that was for haemophiliac influenza, and I was treated, but still following that there were no other follow-ups. And as a child, it didn't really bother me, but when I look back on it now, I think, why wasn't I followed up on? And my husband sometimes says to me, but why would you be? You're fine. And I am, on the whole, I am absolutely fine, and I am very lucky. But maybe it's more the developmental follow-up that I was looking for. Maybe it was more that kind of what's going on inside rather than outside that I need that focus on. And it really stood out for me in Sam's talk as well, of seeing the comments popping up of this describes my child. It described me as well. And one of the points that Sam raised was how we don't externalize these things so it doesn't get noticed so much. I was an excitable, energetic, bit of a tomboy that just kind of loved everything. So it wasn't really picked up on that there would be anything going on for me. Excuse me. When I was at secondary school, I think it became more apparent. And interestingly, how we've talked about maths as well. I remember my maths teacher turning to me and saying, "You're not going to pass your maths GCSE, and I don't have any more time for you because I've got other people who need your help more." Bearing in mind, this is 90s and like a long time ago. But I was devastated because I needed that. I needed my C. And so my mum and dad bought me a good old-fashioned CD-ROM for the computer, and we worked together for me to scrape that C. I'm nearly 40, and I still don't think there's enough known about premature birth and the SEND side of things, which is exactly why we're here. It's exactly why you guys have been working on this programme, why the PRISM study has been done. And I think it's absolutely amazing that we're being focused on through the stages of life. It's not just about those early years. Well, this was me. I keep forgetting to go through the slides. This was me being my energetic tomboy self. And I was very quirky, loved my pet goats. And I was always kind of messing around. I loved primary school. I had a great time. And I thrived there. I was popular. I was actually relatively tall for my age as well, surprisingly. I wouldn't say academically I was clever. I was actually quite average, and but I was confident and happy. However, I did have a real irrational need to please everybody. And I think that was because of my brother. My brother, when I was about 2, was born also prematurely, slightly more so than myself. And sadly, he didn't survive. And it must have been absolutely awful for my parents to only 2 years after my birth and everything they went through with me to go through this again. And they struggled with it. The whole family struggled with it. But I know I did too. I don't remember how old I was when I decided that I needed to be as good as I could be. But I know I was young, as it kind of gave me this sense of needing to please everybody. I set myself this rule that I needed to behave in a way that would justify my being here and his not being here, which possibly sounds sad and not justified, but for me it felt very real. And I can't stress enough that this was never said to me. It was a survivor guilt that I developed at a very early age. But I'm not surprised that no one picked up on it either. It was the 80s, and I was a child that was really eager to please everybody. And there's not many issues with that as far as teachers are concerned. It's a good thing. When I went to secondary school, I was no longer popular. I hated it. I was a bit quirky. I had no friends with me, as I chose to go to a different school to all of my friends outside of my catchment area. And I was very much alone. And without those friends around me that boosted me and made me that confident and accepted the little bit of crazy that I've got, I noticed how nervous I was and how different I was to everybody else. And then puberty hit, and that's where my parents say that I turned into Kevin from Harry Enfield's Kevin and Perry, because I completely withdrew and went into myself. Again, something that really rang out for me when Sam was talking. When I was at university, I studied a unit on neuropsychology, and I had an EEG done on me as part of an experiment within school, within the class, just to show how it worked. And everybody made loads of jokes about how amusing it was that I was slow and saying that it was just from the country. But still, nobody really picked up on anything. It was just this bit of a laugh, and it was okay because I was achieving. I'd got to university, and like it must have been some other thing going on. I don't know how much all of that had to do with my birth. I genuinely don't, which kind of my point. It's only in the last year or so that I found out that it's common for people born prematurely to have smooth areas of the brain. And it's only really since then that I've been looking at all of the other things that go on for us and found out that there are lots of explanations for the way I've always been. And just before my 38th birthday, I was diagnosed with ADHD. Looking back now, I often wonder how teachers didn't pick up on it. But like I said, it was the 80s and 90s, and only now is ADHD in girls and women being more recognised, certainly in schools and in the health sector. And I hope that that's what carries on to happen more and more, and that with Prem Aware, we get more awareness of how this is for us as well. When I look back on my education, knowing now about my ADHD, I can see kind of why some of the things happened, why I was picked on through secondary school, because actually I used to say some really stupid things. Things like in a German class being asked if people collected anything, and I had a current obsession with spoons, and I put my hand up to say, yes, I collect spoons. Who wouldn't get laughed at for saying something like that? But I didn't think things through quite so well. I either hardly spoke at all, or I spoke way too much. And I was a bit of a teacher's pet because I needed to move around and I needed to get up and get that fidget out of me. I'm even quite conscious that I'm fidgeting about quite a lot now. And it also filled my need. If I was doing things for teachers and helping out and handing out papers and taking things to the office, I was getting that movement, I was getting my bit of hyperactivity out, but I was also pleasing people, which was feeding that need as well. The more I withdrew, the less of a nuisance and a burden, for want of a better word, I wanted to be. Things like I wouldn't ask my parents to take me to meet friends, even though they really encouraged me to, because I just wanted them to not put them out at all. And they would be saying, come on, please, we'll take you, we'll take you. In hindsight, I was struggling and no one noticed, partly because I masked it, and partly to them, I was just an awkward teenager. Now a lot more focus is put on mental health now, because back then even a doctor once said to me, you're just an awkward teenager. So we're seeing that now. If I was in school now, I think it probably would have been picked up that I was struggling. And studies like the PRISM study is showing that we need education professionals to be more aware of the needs of us as premature children. It shows that we're at higher risk of all of the things that Sam spoke about. The slow processing, it just is everything I struggled with. Poor fine motor skills, the difficulty with maths, the poor attention and social and emotional, it's all there, and it all explains so much of my childhood. I had to work really flipping hard to be average. And it's sickening when I was seeing other people not doing so much and coming out with really good scores. But I did it. I remained average through school. My grades were mostly C's at GCSEs. My A-levels were B's and E's. My B's are kind of a fluke, and even one of my teachers said to me, how the hell did you do that? And I wouldn't want to repeat my secondary school years again, But when I look back now and think about what could have been different, what I could have been more aware of, if I did do my teenage years again, I would want someone to talk to. I want someone that I could safely ask the questions that always felt so silly. I'd want school staff to be aware that I'd had a difficult start to life and what this might mean for my learning style. I'd want to know what my development was and how things were going. And in some ways, actually, I'd still like to know that. I'd still like to know if there are any lasting effects from my birth. A gym instructor once told me that some of the tests that I'd had were consistent with having small lungs. But that shouldn't be coming from a gym, that should be coming from follow-ups. I've got rubbish sinuses. I can get a sinus infection at the drop of a hat. And I'd be really interested to find out more about smooth areas on the brain. I want someone to look past all the masking that I did and to sit there when I said, yeah, I'm fine, and say, but are you really fine? Let's unpick this. Rather than write me off as a middle of the road kid that neither needs managing to achieve or pushing to excel. What would my potential really have been? If I'd known then what I know now, I think my life could have been quite a lot easier. But I'm not saying better, because I've had a fantastic life and I am really happy. And I just think that if life had been a bit easier, I might have had more time and things might not have been so chaotic and so last minute. Because despite all of that, I have achieved a lot. I got my Bachelor of Science in Psychology with honours. Wasn't a brilliant grade, but I got it. I've been fortunate to work with some amazing people that have taught me about what autism and ADHD means for them and how it can be so brilliant. I'm running my own business, helping families and schools to support children through my own common sense approach. I gave a TED talk in 2019 on having empathy for young people. I've got a wonderful family. And at this point, it's made me realise I'm still not going through my slides. I do apologise. I have got a wonderful family. I still doubt myself quite a lot. I do still try to please everybody, but I'm working on that. I still have some very odd ways. Some are annoying, but most are actually pretty funny because I'm just a big kid still. But most proudly of all, I'm actually a pretty good wife and mum. And for Prem babies to grow up and have that kind of stability, I feel really, really privileged. And I feel really privileged for you allowing me to come and speak today, because that was way out of my comfort zone, but an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Such a powerful story. I think the comments are flooding in, everyone really enjoying what you say. So thank you so much for joining and sharing your experiences, you know, and you should be really, as I said, you found that nerve-wracking. You know, we all have been today doing these, so you should be really proud of yourself for coming up and doing that. We really do appreciate it, and I'm sure you've helped lots of families and will continue to help lots more as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll just rewind. So Janet, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. So if you just, you know, take a few minutes to tell us about, you know, why you've become a Prem Aware school and what that process has been like, and why you've chosen to do that. That'd be brilliant.
Right. So I've got Anne-Marie here as well, because besides deputy head, I'm also the Senko, and I'm a part-time teacher as well. So I've got quite a lot of roles. So Anne-Marie does an awful lot with me, because without her I couldn't do the many roles I've got. So our journey began with just before lockdown. I had a class with a little boy who had struggled with his physical development in early years, mainly with hand-eye coordination, attention. He always seemed to be where he shouldn't be, and we were concerned about him. So that when he got into my class at the first parents' evening, I thought I would just ask Mum did she notice any difficulties at this stage? And I was quite shocked when she told me he was actually born at 30 weeks. And whilst in the Prem unit for 10 weeks, it had numerous brain bleeds. But at the time, she didn't feel it important to tell us at school. So we were quite surprised at that, weren't we, that she didn't see it, that it would hold him back in any way. She didn't think of any of his difficulties might be because of his Prem. So I think it led to, we researched Prem babies on the internet, because as a school, I have to admit, we knew very little. And we came across the smallest things, and I did the training, and Marie did the training, and it just resonated so much with this little boy. It was like it had just been wrote about him. He's so quirky, so lovely, very compliant. Even though his academic achievement was quite low, sometimes he really surprised you. I remember in year 1, we were doing words beginning with K, and he came out with coral, catalyst. It was just so surprising. He's such a lovely little boy. So all of the staff decided that they wanted to do the Prem awareness training. We changed our school intake for the new intake, so that we asked the information if your baby was born prematurely and how many weeks, and parents were quite good with that. And then we did the same with all our current parents, and Anne-Marie's going to take over from there. Yeah.
So after we asked the parents if they wanted to share whether the child had been Prem or not, 7 parents came forward, and out of those identified 7 pupils, 5 of whom have had some form of SEN support, which leaves us about 71% of that initial 7 children. The difficulties range from semantic and pragmatic difficulties with language processing and retention, and the working memory, as Samantha and Lisa have talked about. Some of those children have had referrals put in for ASC, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, and we've noticed quite a noticeable social vulnerability with all of those children. They're all, each one of those 5 are working below their age-related expectations, which then has implications on the work that they're doing in class, whether they need work differentiated just within class, or whether we have to apply to outside agencies like the speech therapists, have an educational psychology involvement, whether we have to instigate a 4+1, which is specific targets, differentiated work, having a designated person working with that child, and eventually, if those difficulties persist, to go for an educational healthcare plan. The little boy that Janet was talking about is in that process at the moment. So we have a diagnosis of ADHD. We have put a referral in for the MAT assessment to take place, which is the ASC assessment. And we're also working towards the educational healthcare plan for him. Where am I up to? Sorry. We've also, as well, while looking at the Prem baby profile, my background was NNEB originally, and many years ago, as NNEBs, we spent a lot of time looking at child development and tracking children's ages and stages. Some of you may know the Mary Sheridan book of development, and a lot of that came through, resonated with the Prem baby profiles that we have in school. We were taught as NNEBs not to look at the child's birth date, but to look at their expected birth date, and also looking at the criteria between the birth date and the impact that has on their development. And having gone over some of that, when you're looking at 12 weeks plus, it can take up to 2 years educationally for those children to catch up, which has a massive impact on the work that they are able to produce and the work that they are able to access in a mainstream school. And that's where we are at the moment. We're tracking each of these children. We're designating a member of staff. We're putting in specific targets so that we can look at where they're up to, what they're able to cope with individually and their rate of progress. These are smart achievable targets that we're working with the parents and the outside agencies that are involved with them. And it's massive, really. It's just massive. There's one other point that I wanted to mention about the educational implications of this that really hasn't been picked up with our local authority and probably not many others. The massive implication it has if a child's expected birth date and actual birth date overlaps the beginning of the school year, because you're going to have children that are really need to be offset or started later in school because developmentally they're not at the same level of cognitive development as other children in their class because of their birth date. So that's where we're up to.
Yeah. But we want to thank the smallest things because it's raised awareness amongst our staff and we've got so much from it, haven't we? But thank you.
No, thank you both for today, but also, you know, getting involved and taking that forward. I think we could, a lot of what you've said really resonates with the scheme, and it's great to hear it in action. Sarah, you got your hand up? No?
I think I was just clapping.
How are you clapping? Sorry.
I was just clapping because it's just very, you know, it's amazing, Janet, you know, to hear what you're doing at your school and the difference you're making to those families. And as a parent of a child at school, you know, born prematurely, I just know what that's going to mean to those families to have that recognised and get that support in place. And that's why it's so important. So, sorry.
I mean, one further point is we're very lucky with our head teacher because she's very supportive with our special educational needs, but she's also allowed us to employ a speech and language therapist 1 day a week. So they're getting specialist support that we can't give.
Amazing.
That's good. So it's good. But so it's raising awareness and going through this process helps to identify that there are mitigations that you could need, which is
Yeah.
good to hear. Do one quick question for you, Janet, that's come in from what in the chat from a fellow Senko. He's talking about how did you disseminate the training across your staff team?
So at staff meetings, but what we also did as well during lockdown, when staff were at home, we asked them to do the training. But then when we came back, we had monthly. The first staff meeting of every month is on special needs. So we've got a programme going, haven't we? So we took about 2 weeks to do the Prem awareness, so that all the learning support assistants and even our lunchtime coordinators have all completed the training as well.
Oh wow, that's brilliant. So that's really innovative the way you've the whole school's embraced it, haven't they? Yeah. Really have. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And thank you. You're a real advocate for us of the scheme. And hopefully, you know, if we're talking this time next year, we'll have hundreds of schools that have followed what you've started. So thank you so much today for sharing your story as well. And thank you to all our speakers on this session, from Sam, from Lisa, from Janet, all of you talking from different perspectives. But I think we can all see in the comments you're all making about how it all comes together to ultimately make a difference for those children that are born premature, that can make a difference in as they move through their childhood and into adulthood. So thank you so much, everyone, for that. So we'll keep all the questions that have been coming in. We will obviously be communicating out after the back of this, and we'll put some of the videos that we've recorded out, so you can all watch that as well in your own time as well, and share across your networks.